I'm starting a new sermon series this week. It's called Campfire Stories. The book of Genesis could also be known as You Think Your Family Has Problems. And that's where we're going to be. We're going to be in the book of Genesis. And I'm doing this because it's based on the lectionary. The Revised Common Lectionary does something really cool during the summertime, which is it follows some of the Old Testament on the timeline. And this year, the Old Testament texts pretty much bring us through these Old Testament patriarchs and matriarchs found in Genesis. And so we'll do 2 weeks on Abraham, 1 week on Isaac, 3 weeks on Jacob, because he needs 3 weeks. That one's rough. And 2 weeks on Joseph. And so that will get us through most of the summer, just a couple months together on that. And so the sermons are going to be a little different. You're going to hear a lot of storytelling. You're going to hear a lot of storytelling and a lot less what I think about that. Just so that we can familiarize ourselves with these stories. And it's interesting because these characters are characters that we teach our children in Sunday school. And yet, I want you to think of the last time that you heard someone preach a sermon on them. And so that's one of the reasons that we're dealing with these texts, is because there are some very adult questions and adult stories that are also found. And also, just so you know, those of you who have children in Sunday school, your children will be learning about these same people on the same weeks. We have online activity sheets and study sheets for your family available on our website. So there's Bible study stuff to do around the table at home for adults, as well as activity sheets for children. We first meet Abraham, or Abram, as he's first known, in Genesis 11. That's like 20 pages into the Bible. It's very early. And Abram is considered the father of 3 different religions. Christianity, what's another one? Islam and Judaism. Very good. So we all trace our history back to Abraham. And the stories of Abraham and the families, the men and the women in the book of Genesis, were the kind of stories that the Hebrew people told around campfires. These were the tales that the Hebrew people told from generation to generation. They're the stories of why things happen, the fables, but also the history of a nation, used to answer questions about life and about God and about why the world and the community was the way that it was. So let's get started. Once there was a man named Abram. He was married to a woman named Sarai. They were from the land of Haran. And God called to Abram and said, "Leave the land that you are living in. Go to the land which I will show you. I will bless you to be a blessing on others." So Abram went, which is crazy. And as God promised Abram and Sarai descendants, children, and offspring, as many descendants as stars in the sky and grains of sand on the seashore. God said, "I will make of you a great nation." God promised this. God made a covenant, a promise with Abram and Sarai. They settled in the land that God showed them, and they made a home. They gave their lives to God and awaited God to keep good on God's promise. But it didn't come. They got older and older, and they were unable to have any children. Many of us know that pain. Many of us know the pain of losing a child before we even know that child. Many of us know what a barren womb felt like for Sarai. So Sarai decided that she would give her handmaiden, a slave named Hagar, to Abram to bear a child. Sounds barbaric to us, but this was surrogacy 3,000 years ago. Hagar wouldn't have really had a choice, given her social standing as a slave. But that's how it went. So Sarai made her slave, Hagar, bear Abram a child. And it worked. It worked. The baby's name was Ishmael, which means God hears. Hagar remained a second-class citizen to the community, but Ishmael was Abram's only son for a long time. When God told Abram to circumcise the entire community, Ishmael was included in that circumcision. Ishmael bore this mark, the mark of God's covenant on his flesh, just like the other Hebrew men. And God made a promise to Hagar and to Ishmael as well, that God would indeed make a great nation of Ishmael also, that he too would be known by God, like the promise that was given to Sarai and Abram. And though Ishmael had been born, God still had a promise to keep, a covenant to keep with Sarai and Abram. God came back to Abram after Ishmael was born and explained to Abram that though Ishmael was his son, the covenant was made through Sarai. And we'll find this throughout the book of Genesis, that the covenant follows the mother. The promise was made to not just Abram, but to Abraham and Sarai, or Sarah. So Sarah did conceive in her 90s. Can you imagine? In her 90s. In fact, when God told Sarah that she was going to get pregnant, Sarah laughed in God's face. Some women are gutsy. Sarah laughed in God's face. So they named the baby Isaac, which means laughter. So here's where we are in our story for today. Hagar and her son Ishmael, Sarah and her son Isaac. Two women with two different promises from God that God is just beginning to make good on. And like most stories, things get complicated as if they weren't already complicated enough. So let's turn to the book and hear what the story is for today.
Genesis 21, verses 8 through 21. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Thank you. Our story for today is the story of the last time that Abraham Sarah and Isaac see Hagar and Ishmael, Abraham will not see this son of his again. There was always tension between Sarah and Hagar. And it started when Hagar conceived Ishmael. Even though this was Sarah's idea, even though it was her idea to make this entire situation happen, feelings come up, jealousy and concern. So once Sarah is able to have a baby of her own, when she has Isaac, and she gets Isaac to the age where she can wean him, which in that day, a lot of children died very young. So once you weaned your child, you were pretty sure they were going to survive. Once she weaned Isaac, she told Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away, to exile them out of the community. He gives them some bread and some water, and out into the wilderness they go. The bread and water do not last long. With no more food and no more water, Hagar knows that she cannot keep her child alive. So she puts him under a bush and walks away so that she does not have to watch him die. It was not her fault that Ishmael was born. As a slave, she didn't really have a choice in the matter. And like any other mother, she loved her son. And there in the desert, Hagar lifted her voice to God. But unlike Sarah lifting her voice, she did not laugh. She wept. And she cries out. But God hears Ishmael. That's what our story says. It's Hagar who cries out to God, but God hears the voice of the boy. God hears Ishmael. That's what his name means, remember? God hears. And God heard. And God said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Hold fast to this child, woman. Hold fast to this child, and I will make of him a great nation." And then Hagar saw a well appear, a well full of water, so her and the child could have a drink. And God stays with the boy until he is a man, and Hagar finds him a wife among the Egyptians. And his tribe is known as the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites. Jews and Christians, we know the covenant that God gave us to be passed down through Isaac, Sarah's son. But the Muslims understand themselves to be descendants of the Ishmaelites. So that's our story for today. The story that God hears. In the sermon series, I don't pick these stories, the lectionary does. And I just want to point out that though this week and next week, as we are talking about Abraham, and our children downstairs are learning stories about Abraham, they are not learning the same stories we are. There are some stories that you do not tell a 6-year-old. And so they'll be talking about the call of Abraham and Sarah the first week, and the second week they will talk about the birth of the baby named Laughter. But our lectionary gives us these texts because these stories have some very adult questions for us to deal with. This is a hard story to hear. And this week, this story raised just one question for me. I asked a couple colleagues what they thought that one question was, and they all thought it was going to be the Muslim question. That was not the question that came up for me. There was one question. And that question is, which children are important? Which children are important? We know kids just down the road from us are not doing as well as some of our kids. We know that some of our kids just get more, and that often, as long as our kids are doing okay, we don't think as much about the other children. So whose children? Which children are important? To us? To God? Which children deserve to go to sleep with full bellies? loving parents, the promise of a good education, the statistics to say that their future is not in a jail cell. Around the world, which children have access to clean water, to schools, to safety? And also, which children have been cast into the wilderness with their mothers barely able to provide or do anything but to scream out to God? Everyone wants what's best for their kids. But often things are just not fair. And I am haunted by this. I am haunted by this reality. I am haunted by the voice of Hagar and her cry echoing through time. There are theologians and rabbis, Christians, who have sat around these fires and who came up with this idea that when Sarah found out she was going to get pregnant and she laughed in God's face, that laugh stretched to the ends of time, that it was God's eternal laugh, that every time we say something's impossible and that God can't handle something or God can't do something, we can hear God's laughter. We hear the laughter of Sarah still echoing. And this week, I was thinking of something else and I just couldn't shake it. I wonder if Hagar's cry also stretches that far and that wide to the end of time for every single child. It's haunting. You know, have I spent so long thinking of us, of myself as these descendants of Abraham and Isaac, as these chosen people, that I have forgotten Ishmael in the brush of the wilderness? I hope not. I hope not. I don't think we've forgotten. I don't think we'd be here on a Sunday morning if we forgot. I think that's part of the reason we show up, right? Because we hear that voice and we know that something has to be done, and we know that there's something that we can do, that we have been called to hear that voice. God hears Ishmael, and I think honestly, we hear Ishmael's voice too. You know, we can relate. We can relate to Sarah's sadness in her barrenness or the joy in her laughter. We relate to Hagar's betrayal and the feel of being cast out and unable to provide. We relate to Abram being triangulated in everything all of the time. I think we can hear all of these voices. And in the same way, I think we can hear the voice of Ishmael if we listen. Part of being a Christian, part of being United Methodist, and specifically part of being a member at Manchester United Methodist, means that we are called to give a large portion of ourselves to the children of this world and of our state and of our city. Y'all, we do more outreach and give more financially than most churches in the state. We are definitely in the top 5 of United Methodist churches in the state. And because of our size and our resources, not because of the arguments we get in on Facebook or because of the way you don't like your neighbor or the way that I struggle with that divisiveness as well, but because of our size and our resources, the things that we have collectively agreed on here, our collective resources, the greater truth on which we agree. Because of that, for sure, more children will have food in their stomachs tonight. It is a fact. More children will go to sleep knowing that they are fed, their heads will hit the pillow, and they will fall asleep easier because of it. And it doesn't make everything right. The work we do, it doesn't make everything right. The story and the tensions in our story for today that we heard, hurt and loss and longing and love triangles and messed up families and children and jealousy and people mucking it up over and over and over again. This is just who we are, my beloved church family. We are a messy people. We are a messy people. But we are a messy people that God continues to love, that God continues to work through, and that God made promises to 3,000 years ago. God made covenant with God's people, these messy people, and God has made good on every word. God continues to make good. God makes good through you and because of you as well, because you know who you are and you know whose you are. Just like young Adler today. We know who claims you, and we claim that kid as well. We make good on our word too. That's the expectation, that's the hope. God blessed Abraham to be a blessing on others. Everything that God has entrusted us with was and is first and foremost God's. Being Christian means that we have to own the fact that none of us are self-made. That's hard for me. My ego wants to think all of the time that I have earned every single thing that I have been self-made often. But there's a greater truth that this is not me. If we are blessed, whatever we are blessed with, then we are called to be a blessing on others with those things. They're not mine to be mine, they're mine so they can become yours. And here together, when we hear a call to action, we take it, don't we? We pray. We pray. We bring food for kids. We collect shoes. We volunteer our time. When we hear Hagar's cry, our hearts pound with compassion. That was God's response. And that's our response. Our story today was the story that God hears when it is you who is cast aside, when it's you who have done the casting aside. God hears, and God stays in relationship, and we hear, and we stay in relationship too. Amen.